welcome to the Thai Football Podcast. I am your host, Gian, and today I have a very special guest with me. It's Dale Farrington. Hi, Dale. Welcome to your own podcast.
Hi, Jan. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, today we're going to be doing a special interview with Dale. He's given me the hosting chair, and I'm going to interview him. And his experiences are going to be the focus of today's episode. So hope you enjoy that. So before we get into the topic which this podcast is known for, please tell me a bit about Dale Farrington before discovering Thai football.
Well, I moved to Thailand in 1997. I came over in 96 to visit a friend, got offered a job. It seemed like a great opportunity. It was initially for 12 months, so I accepted it. I thought I had nothing to lose. 12 months working in the tropics sounded quite appealing at the time, and ended up staying for nearly 25 years. So I've got a foot in both camps now, spend some of my time in England, some of my time in Thailand. So I worked at an international school, a job that I was very, very happy doing. And during the course of my time there, I kind of looked into getting into local football. The Thai league back in that day wasn't as appealing as it is now. It was very Bangkok centric. The clubs were all forces clubs or company teams. Nothing that was that attractive really. So I started following the national team and had some great times watching them. The 1998 Asian Games in particular was a very exciting period when Peter Withe was in charge and we got to the semi-finals. I often say that the quarter-final game against South Korea when we won with 9 men was probably one of the greatest nights I've ever spent watching football, and that still holds true. It was a fantastic occasion, something I'll never forget. I was still playing myself back in the day. Used to play in the Bangkok Casuals League for a team based in Pattaya. And I used to buy Siam Football, the weekly or fortnightly magazine. And in the back of there, they always used to list fixtures. So I was looking for local games, and I just happened to chance upon one that mentioned Chonburi, which was the closest to where I was living at the time. So I set off in search of Chonburi FC. It took me a long time to find it. Nobody in the city knew where the ground was. Nobody even knew there was a football club. And eventually I just stumbled across it by chance. And luckily I got there in time for the match. I think they were playing Nakhon Pathom. We won 3-1, and I haven't looked back since.
Because you've been in Thai football for so long, you have this very unique perspective, which I really appreciate in all of our online discussions, which is that you've seen how things have changed and developed so rapidly from when you first discovered it to now. And you always emphasize this point when comparisons are made with other leagues. So can you tell us what it was like in the early 2000s, late 1990s? What was Thai football like? And just to emphasize how far it's come in that time.
Domestically, it wasn't, like I said earlier, it wasn't very appealing. You know, there was nothing really to attract fans to the games. I think it's Saturday afternoons they'd show a Thai Premier League match live on the telly, and it was usually Thai Honda. I think they used to pay for the privilege to be on because obviously it was good advertising. So you'd get adverts for Honda before the game, you get adverts during the game as well. They used to show them during the match. And so when the ball went out for a throw-in, an advert would flash on for Thai Honda. And then obviously at half time, you'd get another 15 minutes of commercials for their product. You know, there weren't ever many people at the games. We went to went to watch TOT once, me and a friend. And I mean, it was entertaining enough, you know, but we never really thought it'd lead to much. Chonburi was very much the same. You know, we were in the provincial league at the time, which was far more representative of the country. You know, in that division, you had teams from Chiang Mai, you had teams from Satoon, all over really, which was ironic that, you know, lower down the pyramid, you had clubs that represented various provinces and cities from around Thailand, and the Premier League was focused entirely on Bangkok. So yeah, it was always difficult getting information. I remember that being a big problem. You know, you could never really find out when the fixtures were or who was playing. And very early on, I managed to get the phone number of a couple of the Chonburi players. And I used to ring them and just say, you know, when's the next game and where are you playing? And they'd say, oh, it's this Sunday at 4:00, wherever. And so I'd just turn up. I mean, I do remember that. There was no way of knowing back then what would happen. You know, I used to go with a friend, my friend Ian. We used to joke about things. You know, we used to say, oh, we'll go to the club shop first, or we'll go to the club bar. Everything that has now become the norm, really, were things that just
Yeah.
seemed beyond our imagination at the time. It was nothing like it is now. I mean, that's the hardest thing to try and get my head around, is just how basic it was. I suppose if you went down and watched semi-pro football, you'd probably get some idea of what the top level was like back in the late 90s, early 2000s. But it was that lack of information. That was the thing. Even I mean, I taught myself to read Thai by looking at football. That was how I started reading. So, there was some information out there, but it was very hard to source. And this was, pre-internet, really. That's the one thing that I do remember, just how hard it was to find things out.
Yeah, and then to see how it's come from that to where it is now, it puts into perspective a lot of complaints that people have about the state of the game right now. So, in which area do you think Thai football has developed the most since then? And on the flip side, in what area has it developed the least?
I think that everything has improved. It's a lot more professional. Obviously, there's so much more information out there in,
Mhm.
not just Thai, but in English, in French, in Norwegian, in lots of different language, whether it's through official sources or through fans doing their own thing. The game is far more professional. I mean, you look at clubs like Burham United, obviously, Bangkok Glass, BG Pathum United, Muang Thong. I mean, they've all raised the standard for everyone. It's hard to say what's been left behind, really. I don't think anything has. I mean, it's all part of the same package, isn't it? So everything kind of gets dragged along. I mean, some of the pitches probably still leave a lot to be desired, but even they are a lot better than the ones that were played on 25, 30 years ago.
Well, that's very good to know. That's good to hear. So moving on now to Chonburi. I mean, as you often remind us, Chonburi changed the face of Thai football when they, along with Suphanburi, were the first two provincial teams to play in the top flight. And they went on and actually won it in '07, which is a huge achievement. And they started this new decentralization of Thai football to almost every corner of the country now. So you were part of that really close up, really firsthand. So I want to know the build up to that success. So how did the club achieve it? What steps did they take to reach that level? What was it like, the excitement building during that time? And going into that '07 season, did you think you were going to win the league?
Interestingly enough, after we'd been promoted from the Pro League in 2005, we won the title in Korat in late June 2005. And then there was a huge gap, a long break that we had before the next season started. I think that our first top flight season started it was February 2006. So what's that, 6, 7 month break? That seems such a long time. And the club did a lot during that period to try and prepare themselves for the new season. And interestingly enough, the first game of 2006, we played Port Authority at home. And we scored after about 2 minutes. And both me and Ian said, "Oh, we're going to walk this league as well." We thought that was it. That's all we needed to know. But obviously, we ended up losing the game 3-1. And the first season was, we were adapting to playing against, but they were better quality opposition. I think we drew quite a lot of games that season. Our record was something like one. I can't remember how many teams were in the league. 12, so 22 games. I think we sort of won 4 and lost 4, and the rest were all drawn. So it was very tight. I mean, there were certainly no signs that year as to what would happen the next season. But during that close season, again, there was a long break. And I remember playing a friendly against the national team at Bangpra, bizarrely, which was just a farmer's field. That was quite an event. Something that again, that wouldn't happen these days. I mean, there weren't any stands there or anything. It is literally a farmer's field, or was at the time. And the whole national team turned up. They were preparing for a competition. And we had the Singapore Cup as well, which we did very well. We got to the final of the Singapore Cup that season and should have won it. So all that kind of led to things, you could see how things had improved. And the professionalism within the club was definitely there. And even during that first season, the crowds we were getting were far larger than anybody else. We were taking away support, which was unheard of. Clubs would turn up at our place with no fans. And I'm not going to name any. I don't want to embarrass them. Port were one.
Not going to name any.
Yeah, exactly. It always amuses me when people talk about crowds. I can sort of point at certain occasions when I remember clubs bringing nobody to Chonburi. So yeah, there were little signs during that first season that even though on the pitch it wasn't quite gelling. And then the following year, we kind of got off to an okay start that I remember. I think the first home game, this is all from memory now. It was a long time ago, Jan. I think the first home game we might have even lost to Terro, who were the big club at the time. They brought about a dozen fans, which kind of highlighted just how massive they were back in 2007. And then we kind of just picked up a little bit of a momentum. And I think players wanted to come and play for us because, there were signs off the field that things were kind of better than everywhere else. And we were a club representing not just a city, but a whole province. And as results improved and we started to build up a bit head of steam, crowds grew and people started paying attention. And I think probably halfway through that season, maybe 2/3 of the way through that season, that's when I thought, yeah, we are going to win the league this year. There's nobody that can compete with us. And, we won it with a game to spare in the penultimate match. We beat our closest rivals, Krung Thai Bank, 3-2. And it was a splendid night. Absolutely great occasion. There must have been, well, unofficial figures said it was 10,000. Which was probably a slight exaggeration, but the place was packed.
Krung Thai Bank, now known as BG Patum United, fun fact of the day. The point about the national team and the playing on an empty field, I mean, in less than 20 years, they're flying on chartered private jets to China. And 20 years ago, they were playing on an empty field. That's quite an impressive, transformation in that time. So I want to ask you, was Chonburi more organized and better run than the other clubs during that time? And I asked that question because the same people who led the club to that success have led them to this very long stagnation from around 2015, ending in relegation this year. How did that happen? How did those same people who made that huge accomplishment get to this point where they are often criticized by both the Chonburi fan base and others? And do you think that the stagnation was self-inflicted, or was it the rise of other better run clubs coming up?
I think it was a bit of both, really. It's plain for everyone to see that many, many other clubs have now come along and overtaken us. And that has happened over the last 10, 15 years. But that was inevitable. That was always going to be the case. Once clubs realised what they could achieve, then the big hitters that we have now, they were always going to take our place. I think there has been a lot of complacency at the club. It was a lot easier back then. Like I said, we attracted all the top players. You look at our squad from 2007 to about 2012, we pretty much made up the entire national team. We had all the national team players playing for Chonburi and players wanting to come. There's a big queue of people wanting to be involved. And it was much easier because the competition wasn't as fierce. It wasn't as strong. They just got a little bit complacent. They failed to move with the times. There were always signs there that we were being left behind, both on and off the pitch. Now, there's lots of rumours as to why the money suddenly seemed to dry up. I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to end up in court. But, there were lots of stories going around as to why we were no longer investing. It was bound to happen. I mean, what we did was clearly the catalyst for what's happened now, without a doubt. I mean, people can question it or whatever, but it's definitely the case. It's definitely true. I can remember going on a mid-season tour up to the northeast in 2009, I think it was, and we played against Nakhon Ratchasima, we played Khon Kaen, and we played Buriram. And for that region as well, that kind of sparked some interest, and it certainly sparked interest in Buriram. It's well documented that they watched videos of our fans to see how to behave. That's a direct quote from an article from Karuna Chitchop.
Have they done it well? Have they emulated your support?
I think they missed the point by a long way, really. Ours was very organic, the way it developed, and theirs was orchestrated from the start. But, fair play to them. They do it differently, and that's fine. Yeah, there's no doubt that inspired them. That visit, as insignificant as it seemed, that was 2009. And of course, within a few months, Newin had bought PEA and moved them to the province. And, within a couple of years, they were dominating Thai football, which is something they continue to do. And that all started with a little seemingly inconsequential friendly on I think it was a Wednesday afternoon. That was clearly the inspiration, but it was always going to happen, I think. And it's good, from a personal point of view and from a Chonburi point of view, it's very disappointing that we haven't kept pace. But Thai football as a whole has certainly benefited from other clubs coming along and doing things better, without a doubt.
So shifting gears a little bit, what's the most memorable match you've ever attended of Thai domestic football?
That is a good question. There've been a few, obviously, in our heyday. The Krung Thai Bank one will always be up there. Winning the league, that was something extra special. A couple of the cup finals, beating Mung Tong, obviously, in the FA Cup final 2010. But there's one that really sticks out. And again, this is something that I've alluded to in the past. And I can understand why people don't kind of get the significance of it. But we played Thai Honda at the old municipal stadium. We were losing 2-0. This was during the championship winning season. And crowds had started to grow by this time. And we were losing 2-0 and it started to rain. Now, there's very little cover even under the main stand at Chonburi Municipal Stadium. So we all kind of had to squash together near the back of that stand. The rain was coming down and I just got this feeling. This feels like it used to feel when I was watching football growing up in England. Everybody squashed together in the pouring rain, watching your team lose at home. It had a real flashback to sort of, my days in England watching football. And the atmosphere just became really good. Everybody was chanting, everybody was singing, which again was unheard of. Nobody else was doing this. This is something I can't stress enough. Nobody else was doing this. And it was all natural. It all evolved naturally. And we got it back to 2-1. Then we got it back to 2-2. And the whole thing was just growing and growing. And things were getting really exciting. And then we scored a third goal and the place just erupted. It was magnificent. And that always sticks in my head because that was when everything really changed for Thai football fan culture. It had been building to that point. You could see it over the course of the season, how crowds were growing and people were getting a bit more vociferous on the terraces. But at that moment, that's when everything changed and everybody was having such a good time that seemed to kickstart it. And we maintained that level for the rest of the season. So that's one game that really sticks in my head, mainly for what was happening off the field, but also, coming back from 2-0 down to win 3-2. And in the grand scheme of things, it's probably a footnote in Chonburi's history and Thai football history, but certainly changed things for the better, definitely, that afternoon.
Similar question next. I don't know how to phrase this, but what's the most surreal moment you've had watching Thai football at a Thai football ground or involved in Thai football? A moment where if you went back home to England and told someone the story, they wouldn't believe you. Do you have any of those moments that you can share with us?
I've got so many, to be honest. I think Thai football in general tends to be pretty surreal, doesn't it? Most of the time. I think. If you said to me, can you remember going to a game where nothing out of the ordinary happened? That would be harder to answer. I'll just pluck a couple out of the air. There was one, I wasn't even at the match, but I remember when Robert Pecura and I can't remember the name of the assistant, they were at Tero and they were due to play a game at TOT. And the teams were out on the field, the referee had gone out, they were all ready to kick off, they'd done the warm-ups, and they suddenly appeared with a tape measure and measured the goals and discovered that they were a few inches shorter than regulation. Now, this was mid-season, so they'd clearly been playing there every week for the season. And they just brought the players off, saying that the goals aren't the right size, we're not going to play. And the match was abandoned before a ball was kicked because the goals weren't up to regulation. And like I said, both teams were out ready to kick off. That was pretty surreal. I remember a couple of weeks later, they turned up at Chonburi, Tero, and we were all waving tape measures at them, which they didn't find amusing, I have to say. His face was a picture that day. I don't think he liked coming to Chonburi because we did tend to pick on him a little bit, Robert. Yeah. Bless him. But yeah, so that was quite surreal. I've seen teams playing with 12 men. That's happened. Again, I think it was our first season in the Premier League. I can't remember who the opponents were, but at one point they made a substitution and we watched, and I was just chatting to Ian and he said, who actually came off then? I'm sure nobody came off. And we counted, and sure enough, they had 12 men. And it took a while for the officials to realise, but they did eventually spot it. I don't know how. And somebody just had to come off, but they'd played for, 5-10 minutes with 12 men. That was quite odd. Obviously, I've seen games played in ridiculous weather conditions, games that just shouldn't have gone ahead. I don't know. I'll probably, once we're finished, I'll probably think of loads more. I mean, there have been so many strange things happen. I remember going to Offsut Spa, the 2010 season. I think it was the last league game, the week before the cup final, and we had 2 players sent off. I mean, we had nothing to lose. It was the last, like I say, last game. There was nothing at stake, and we had a couple of players sent off. And I remember Sintavichai, our goalkeeper, suddenly took it upon himself to play as a winger. And so we played about 10 minutes without a goalkeeper. That was quite a bizarre night. So yeah, there's been a lot over the years. Like I say, I will remember loads more when we've finished.
So moving on from the history to more current times, a player you know pretty well is Pipop Onmo, who is your head coach for next season. He was a hero for Chonburi during its glory years and when you were most involved at the time. So what kind of guy is he? Do you have any stories of him that you can tell us? And do you think he will make a good coach for Chonburi next season?
What kind of guy is he? We'll start with that. He's an absolutely lovely guy, a smashing bloke, one of the nicest people I've ever met. And like you say, he is a legend. Again, stories of Peepop. I can remember him turning up one game on his motorbike, and for some reason he wasn't in the starting 11. I don't know why. And he just came and sat with the fans, which was quite nice. Another one, which something I'll always remember, we were in Pacific Park in Sirachau one day, me and my wife, and we were going up the escalator, and I just heard somebody shout my name, and
Oh.
so no, somebody shout, who's that? And I looked over, and it was Peepop, and he was shouting me, which was quite a feather in my cap. And he asked me for a selfie once as well. I met him, and he said, "Oh, can I have a selfie?" And I've got the photograph, so that was his request for a selfie with me. But he's a great guy, and obviously lots of memories of him on the field. For someone of his stature, he was a wholehearted player, never gave less than 100% ever. He was brave, he was strong, scored a lot of goals, led by example. You could see the younger players looking up to him. Now, as for his coaching credentials, he got Rayong up. I was surprised when he came, to be honest. I thought he would have stayed with Rayong for at least a season in the top flight. I think he'd earned that. But obviously the offer to come to Chonburi was too good for him. He's kind of unproven as a coach, even though he got a team promoted. I don't think he was in charge that long, was he, at Rayong? So maybe a lot of the hard work had been done before, or maybe I'm doing him a disservice there. But it's one of these occasions where you think, I don't want his legacy to be ruined by what he does off the field. Because as far as I'm concerned, there should be a massive statue of him outside the ground and a stand named after him. We all want him to do well. There'll be absolutely nobody who won't be 100% behind him, and we'll be hoping that he does well. I mean, he's assembling quite a good squad. I've heard one or two stories about him when he was doing his coaching, and he seems to have taken things on board, and he seems to be up to the task. I mean, it is a big job. I mean, really, nobody's had to do this before. Even though we came up from the Pro League, there wasn't anywhere near as much scrutiny as there is now. He'll be under the spotlight. He'll have the support of the fans. He'll certainly have the support of the management. I just hope that it works out for him. I really do. More than anything else, I want him to succeed because he deserves it. But we'll have to wait and see how it's going to pan out.
Is he your favorite Thai footballer of all time? And if not, who is?
Yes, he is. Yeah,
Awesome.
without a doubt. And it kind of hurts me that he does get overlooked, really, when people start saying, oh, the greatest this, the greatest that. It's understandable because a lot of people would have missed his heyday. He's certainly one. And it's kind of backed up, people like Jason With speak very highly of him. Steve Darby, even though he never really broke into the national team, Steve speaks highly of him as well. And it's nice to have someone else saying how good he was. He does get forgotten when people start naming greatest ever players or the best player to play in the Thai league. And I just think, well, hang on a minute, maybe in the last 10 years, but you've we did play Thai football before then. I've been very lucky that I've actually seen the Thai league all the way through. I mean, when did it start? 96. So I've been there right from the start. So I've kind of got a more overall view of it, and I'm able to say, well, this has happened before, or this player was better than this one, or whatever. I mean, I know it's all subjective, but yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, he's certainly my favourite, and the fact that he's such a nice bloke as well definitely helps.
Yeah, that tends to happen when someone is, nice to me personally. If I meet them, I'll speak highly of them on and be completely biased. So I get it, but no, I fair enough. Similarly, which player do you think would you say is the most wasted potential? And by that I mean a player who could have been great, but something happened somewhere and they didn't achieve that.
Artit Suntornpit. That's my answer. A player who was so gifted, so talented, but incredibly lazy.
Hmm.
He could have been a great footballer. I mean, his free kicks were fantastic. If anybody wants to look for his free kicks on YouTube, there's a couple on there. When he played, he was exciting. He used to run at people. He used to take people on. He was quick. He was skillful. He was obviously part of our most successful team, but he was just so lazy. He wouldn't go that extra mile. Everybody's different, you've got different personalities, but he was kind of the anti-P-pop, if you like. When you spoke to him off field, you just got the impression that he didn't really want to talk to you, which is fair enough. I mean, not everybody's the same. Not everybody is gregarious and as outgoing, but I just felt that he could have achieved so much more than what he
Hmm.
did if he'd have applied himself. There's absolutely no doubt he had the talent. He was just lazy, I think. Or maybe he just didn't believe in himself, which is sometimes happens, doesn't it? So I think he's probably one of the great lost Thai players without a doubt.
Do you have a favorite player, a favorite non-Chonburi player, or a favorite player who never played for Chonburi? Do you have one? And if so, who is it?
Favorite player who never played for Chonburi? That's a good question. I'll have to think about that. I've a lot of time for Cowan. We talked about him, didn't we, a couple of months ago? And I think he's a good role model for the kids. He was very dedicated. He
Mhm.
probably underachieved. I think we said this, didn't we, the last time we spoke? But there's certainly no doubt he had a fantastic career. He was driven. He was someone who clearly wanted to do well and set himself targets. And for a Thai goalkeeper as well, I mean, I've got this thing about Thai goalkeepers, even though, I can probably name two or three who are quite outstanding. I think it's an area that they do need to work on. And he's definitely, if you were to look and say, right, okay, this is what a goalkeeper should look like, it would be a picture of Cowan. And I think the way he conducted himself, the way he's looked after himself, the way he behaves on the pitch, the way he behaves off the pitch, he would have been great at Chonburi without a doubt. I mean, he was great for Mung Tong. His spell at Port probably didn't go as well as could have been expected, but that's understandable given the animosity between the two clubs, I suppose. He's someone I admire greatly. If you want to go back, I mean, someone like Zico, I mean, I'd love to have had Zico playing. He did come to coach us. But if he could have played for us in his prime, that would have been fantastic. Again, he was a great player, as was pretty much everybody in that squad from the late 90s. Again, if you weren't around at that time, you probably don't realise just how good they were, that team. And you had people like Turdsak who came in just a little bit later. You had Dusit, you had Zico, you had Warrawut. A fantastic squad they had at the time. So yeah, I'd love to have seen Zico play for us and Cowan from the modern era, definitely.
Yeah, it's a shame that Gowin's retired at only 34 years old. He's just announced retirement, I think, last month. He's still part of our coaching staff, and just having him at the club is makes a huge difference. When you see other keepers playing till their late 30s, early 40s, I wish he didn't retire, but here we are. Thanks, good answer. I would say very good answer.
Yeah, no,
Um,
yeah, I mean, he'll have his reasons, and you've obviously got to respect. He knows his body better than anybody. He knows whether he's still up to the task, and it's a big thing, isn't it, to retire? Like you say, he could have easily just carried on. He could
mhm,
have picked up his pay packet for the next 4 or 5 seasons, and people wouldn't have thought any less of him, I don't think. But again, I think this is why he's such an admirable person. He's clearly thought, right, I can't perform to the level that I want to perform. Therefore, I'm going to focus all my attention on coaching others, and I'll still be around the club. There's no substitute for playing, but obviously he wants to still be involved. And again, I think that sums him up perfectly, as a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. He's up there as well with my all-time favorites. Possibly the first most. I have to go think about that as well. If we reverse the roles, I'll prepare my answers. So you're moving to the city of Konkan soon. And so naturally, I guess you've started following Konkan United a little bit more closely. From a distance, they look like a well-run club to me, but I've never been there. I've never been to the stadium and never witnessed it. So as someone who's, getting ready to move there, what is it like? How do they engage with supporters? Are they well run? What's the enthusiasm like? And how would you compare their fan culture to Chonburi's?
Currently, the fans are better than the fans we get at Chonburi. There's that earthiness that they have. I've sat in the main stand and I've sat amongst the hardcore, as we have to call them, and been very impressed. They get behind the team, they create a fantastic atmosphere. There's some real characters in amongst them, which you always find at Thai football. So it's a pleasure. I enjoy going there. I mean, obviously, it's not going to replace Chonburi in my affections at all. It's purely out of convenience. I mean, I'm probably not that much further away from Nongbur as well, which is a different experience going there. But I enjoy that. I think probably it's nice to go to games where for me, there's nothing really riding on it, and I can just kind of soak up the atmosphere. I'm starting to sound like Rob now, aren't I? But it's good to go as a sort of semi-neutral, I suppose, and just be able to enjoy it. But going back to Konkan United, there are things they could do better. The crowds are great. I mean, they're getting, 5,500, which is quite impressive. Although for a city the size of Konkan, it probably could be bigger. I mean, again, it's a case of, even though it's a large, major, thriving city, can they support 3 football clubs? I mean, that's a completely different argument. Konkan United will benefit from having their own stadium. You go there and everything's yellow and black, which is Konkan FC. They try and cover it up with banners and stuff, but underneath it's still there, and it's like the Princess and the Pea, isn't it? You can still feel it. It's not really your home ground. But they seem to be getting things right, and the fact that they stayed up is a major achievement. There is a lot of potential there. It's just, where do they go next? How do they achieve the next step? Because they have to consolidate. They have to become an established top flight club. They have to have their own ground. They have to have their own identity, their own stadium. The city is growing. I think within 5-10 years, Konkan is going to be a major player in, not just in Thailand, but the whole of Southeast Asia. Everything is being built that way. It's a thriving place. It's buzzing. And hopefully the football clubs can get caught up in that. I mean, I'd like to see Konkan do well as well. I used to go and watch them whenever they came down to sort of the Chonburi area, purely because, that's where my wife's from, and there's a little bit of interest there. And I was there the day they got promoted to the Premier League when they played at PTT Rayong and went up. So it'd be nice if Konkan could drag themselves back up into the top flight as well. And, 2 Konkan clubs in the top flight would be fantastic.
Yeah, we were still waiting for 2 Chiang Mai clubs in the top flight, and they never came up at the same time. And now it looks even less likely. So maybe it will be Konkan to take that mantle up from them. So slightly left field question here, very left field question, but we've seen a lot about Thai football. And as much as we love it, we know there are many downsides. So, for example, while you can make great money if you reach the top and you're a national team player, in the lower tiers, the state of the game probably puts a lot of people off. I mean, you have players not being paid on time, clubs going to FIFA constantly, owners and agents and all these different players can make the experience of a player in the lower divisions quite difficult. And I think it's important to remember that as fans. Hypothetically, if you were a parent and your son, and we'll say son for now, because the women's game in Thailand is a totally different issue at the moment. If your son said they want to become a footballer in Thailand, knowing what you know about Thai football, knowing it in and out, possibly more than anyone else who speaks English at all, on this entire planet, would you encourage them or discourage them as your first reaction?
Oh, I'd encourage them 100%. I'd be totally behind them, without a doubt. I mean, obviously, I'd express how important it was to learn a trade as well, or get an education. I think that's hugely important, and that applies to anyone. I mean, football's a very short career. We know this. If you're lucky, you break into the first team at sort of 18, 19. And by the time you're 34, 35, you're ready to finish. I mean, that's what, 15 years maybe, if you're lucky. It's important to have something to fall back on, whether that's in a different field or whether you do your coaching badges or something connected to football, become a physiotherapist, whatever, but I would certainly encourage any child of mine to play football. Yeah. Obviously make them aware of the pitfalls along the way, get them good advice. I'm lucky that I do know quite a lot of people involved in the game. But presumably in this hypothetical situation, real people still exist. I can ask people I know for advice, can I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, do you want me to invent hypothetical friends that could give him advice? Because I'll do that as well.
Hypothetical players you hypothetically have spoken to.
But I'd make sure he sought advice from people involved in the game. I know players, I know coaches, I know managers. Without a doubt, I would encourage anybody to do it. I taught for a long time in Thailand, and I saw some incredibly talented young people play for school teams, both boys and girls. I would have loved to seen some of them break through. There's one lad in particular, I got him trials at Assumption College, which I'm assuming it's still the case. Every year they have hundreds of kids turn up and they whittle it down over the course of the weekend, and he made the second day. And that was quite an achievement because the standard is extremely high. And, one or two others that I know who've gone into coaching. Definitely, I'd encourage any child of mine to follow their dream, if you will, but also be realistic.
That's why I thought of this question. I know it's a very odd question, but it's kind of how much faith do you really have in the Thai football ecosystem is gauged by that question. So I thought I'd ask it.
Nobody's saying that it's perfect. It's far from it, without a doubt. And when you see clubs that haven't been paying players, then it's worrying. I mean, I don't think there's a single person who'd go to work and not get paid. Nobody should accept that. Nobody should put up with it at all. And football's no different. Which is why I said, I'd make sure he was aware that these kind of things happen. And, you do have to have some. I mean, we've seen stories, haven't we, now of players selling things on Facebook and, getting part-time jobs, which is, I totally, I mean, even, going back to English football, I can remember, like I'm old enough to remember, and my mum and dad were really friendly with a lot of the Man City and Man United players back in the late 60s. My mum's best friend was married to Harry Dowd, who was the goalkeeper for Man City when they won the league, when they won the FA Cup in 1969. And Harry was a plumber. He was a plumber who played football. He just happened to be playing for the team who won the league and won the FA Cup. Quite often, if City were at home, he'd work on a Saturday morning. But even people like Franny Lee, Franny Lee had his own business. But even at that top level in England, and we're not talking that long ago, and what you have to remember is as big as Man City are now, certainly in the late 60s, early 70s, they were as big then. They were winning things. They won like I said, they won the league in 68. They won the FA Cup in 69. They won the Cup Winners' Cup in 1970. I can remember, going around to Harry's house and he'd go off to work at 8 o'clock in the morning with his tool bag. And then Saturday afternoons, he just happened to be playing in front of 50,000 people at Main Road or whatever, so even relatively short time ago, players in England were still having to work for a living. And again, as I said, it's a short career. So you do need something when you finish playing. So I think that is important. And Thai football's no different.
If I'm correct, most Premier League clubs were formed in about the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's a good 60, 70 years after they're formed. You still have semi-professionals or players who have other jobs. And in Thailand, these clubs that are 20 years old at most, and they've already fully professionalized. So it again puts in a perspective. That's a really good insight. So last question, maybe not a very surprising question, but if you were made FA President Madame Pang's most esteemed advisor for one day, and you could make a total of 3 suggestions, which she would listen to without any reservations, and she would immediately implement, what would you suggest?
I'd say, whatever you do, don't log on to Twitter. That would be the first one. Second would be listen to this podcast. You might learn something. And the third would be surround yourself by people who knew what they were doing. No, seriously, you do seem to get the same things cropping up over and over again. Now,
Mm.
you just said Thai football is relatively young. This is
Mhm.
something we have to understand. In its current form, the league format has only been going since 2006. That's less than 20 years. That's
Mm.
no time at all. We have made major strides in that time. You can't argue with that. If I took someone from who'd been to one game in 2006, they hadn't been since, and I took them to watch a game now, their mind would be blown. That's how far we've come in such a short space of time. And all the little things that people get worked up about really aren't that important. That we've just discussed one of the most serious issues, players not getting paid. Now that is clearly something that needs to be addressed. So on a serious note, that'd certainly be one. I'd say
Mhm.
make sure that any club can give you assurances that that won't happen, that they will be able to pay their players and pay their staff. But everything else just seems to be tiny little things. All right, so they have breaks for the national team. The national team are always going to be at the top of the pile. They're always going to be the most important thing. As fans, as frustrating as it is, we have to accept that and understand that it's going to happen. We all come from different cultures, different backgrounds. I mean, in England, I would say, and this is just a guess, this is just me speaking from experience, most fans would put club before country every time.
Mm.
I would rather Oldham Athletic got promoted back into the Football League than England win the Euros, without a doubt. It's not even up for debate for me.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
flip that in Thailand, I'm pretty
Yep.
sure the opposite is true. Most
Yeah.
Thai football fans would rather Thailand qualify for the World Cup. I could be totally wrong with that. That's just the impression that I get. A successful Thailand national team would certainly do more for Thai football.
If you ask me, I'm sure this is a common opinion. I did ask on the Twitter space before the Asian qualifiers, World Cup qualifiers against China. I asked if you could choose, we go through the next round or Muangthong win the League Cup, which is the same week. What do we choose? And everyone said, yeah, we go through the next round. And that's just a qualifying game. And this is a cup. I mean, I would say if you take Thailand winning the Asian Cup or Muangthong winning the AFC Champions League, it's easy. I want Thailand to win the Asian Cup. So I think you're spot on.
You talk to any foreigners, they would say the complete opposite, I'm sure.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I would. I'd rather Chonburi got back into the top flight than Thailand qualified for the AFF Cup
Yeah.
or whatever it is. That's because of my background and my culture. As much as I love the Thailand national team, and I do, as I said right at the beginning of this conversation, that was my gateway. That's how I got into Thai football. But for me, Chonburi is more important than the national team. The same as
Yeah.
Oldham Athletic are more important than England. So going back to your original question, I mean, the first one is obviously pay players. Make sure that every club is able to pay players. All the other little niggles, things like the breaks and I mean, does it matter if fixtures aren't out yet? I mean, really? We've got them out, but we don't have kickoff times and dates. I don't think it really makes much difference. I mean, just because a couple of foreign fans are inconvenienced, the counter argument is, if they put the fixtures out in plenty of time, people could make arrangements. That's fine. Yeah, I totally get that. But when you take into account the number of people who actually go and watch Thai football, it's not a
Mhm.
lot, is it? There's not a lot of people being incompetent. I don't think having a fixture list out 6 weeks before the start of the season or whatever it is really going to make that much difference. I don't think it's going to encourage more and more people to go to games. I think, people tend to be a bit more ad hoc here. People will turn up. If there's a game on, people will turn up regardless if they've just found out about it or if it was advertised 6 weeks ago. In fact, they're more likely to turn up if they find out the day before that it's on. I think by and large they're getting things right. It's quite a tough one, isn't it? Because like I said, a lot of the issues we tend to have aren't really that important. Refereeing is something I'd probably look at. I
Yeah.
mean, and again, I've said in the last couple of podcasts, they are looking at ways to improve it. So there are signs that has been addressed, which is a good thing. And I certainly think that's important that we get good officiating at matches. And
Mhm.
scrap VAR, I think I can probably include that in this because I just loathe and detest it with every fiber in my body. It's a blight on the game. I don't like it, full stop, and nobody will change my mind on VAR. Improving officiating, scrap VAR is probably part of the same thing. And the third thing, The TV thing is probably something that does need sorting, and it'd be great. I mean, as you yourself know, you spend quite a lot of time out of the country. It'd be nice to be able to access more Thai football when you're abroad. There's definitely a market, a very small one, admittedly, but I've been extremely impressed by BG's coverage and Thai Port's
Yeah.
coverage. It's
Yes.
fantastic. It's so professional, so well done. And why we can't have that across the whole league, I don't know. That would be
Mhm.
magnificent. It's just a case of saying, right, sit down, watch this, now make it happen for the whole league. So really, in summary, Jim, to answer your question, the three things would be look after players' welfare, make sure that clubs can pay them. Second one would be officiating, train the referees to the highest possible standard, scrap VAR, scrap VAR, scrap VAR. And the third one would be make the product, as we have to call it, more widely available. That's getting good TV deals and also branching out a bit further, like other leagues in the region do.
Sounds good. I really wish you were made her esteemed advisor for a day, and we could see all those things be implemented. Well, that was my last question, Dale. So thank you for appearing on your own podcast. I'll give you back the hosting chair now.
That's been great. Thank you. It's been nice to be on the other side of the table. I've enjoyed that a lot and some great questions.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening. We'll see you soon.